Over the last few days, something unsettling has been unfolding quietly in Northern California. Shasta Lake, the largest reservoir in the state and the backbone of California's water system, has surged upward at a speed that experts did not expect. In just a short window of time, the lake rose more than 1.5 feet in a single day, bringing it to only 63 feet below full capacity. For a region that has lived under drought warnings for years, that number might sound reassuring. But inside water management offices, the reaction has been very different. This rise is not slow, it is not seasonal, and it is not behaving the way California's water infrastructure was designed to handle. What's happening at Shasta Lake is not a gentle recovery. It is a rapid acceleration. And when water moves faster than planning models allow for, even strong systems can begin to fail. For decades, California's reservoirs have been managed around predictability. Snow falls in the mountains. It melts gradually in spring. Rivers rise slowly. Reservoirs respond with controlled releases. That rhythm allowed engineers time to adjust, communities time to prepare, and infrastructure time to absorb pressure. That rhythm has now been broken. In just over 2 weeks, Shasta Lake has risen more than 35 feet. Not over a season, not across several months, but in a compressed burst driven by a series of powerful storms known as atmospheric rivers. These storms do not behave like ordinary rainfall. They carry massive volumes of moisture and unload it over short periods, overwhelming landscapes that have not yet recovered from years of dryness. Hydrologists who have monitored this basin for decades say the speed of this rise is what stands out most. Water levels that once took months to climb are now jumping in days, and speed more than volume is what introduces danger. Because fast water does not give systems time to adapt. Only a year ago, the situation was the complete opposite. Shasta Lake was hovering near historic lows, sitting close to 31% capacity. Boat ramps ended in dry ground. Marinas shut down early. Cities discussed emergency conservation measures. Farmers drilled deeper into already stressed groundwater reserves. California was operating under a drought mindset where every drop mattered. That mindset no longer fits the reality on the ground. When the storms arrived, they hit a landscape that had been fundamentally altered by years of drought. Dry soil had hardened and compacted, losing much of its ability to absorb rainfall. Instead of soaking into the ground, rainwater rushed across the surface, flowing directly into rivers and reservoirs. The land did not drink the rain, it rejected it. As a result, reservoirs filled faster than expected, rivers rose rapidly, and systems built to carefully store water suddenly faced the opposite challenge: how to release it safely without flooding everything downstream. California did not slowly transition from drought to abundance. It snapped from one extreme to the other. At Shasta Lake, operators began monitoring inflows hour by hour. Community leaders refreshed gauge readings daily. What they saw was a lake climbing faster than planning documents ever anticipated. This was not water returning gently to an empty system. This was water arriving with momentum. And momentum changes the rules. Dams are designed to manage balance. They rely on predictable inflows and controlled releases. What they struggle with is velocity, too much water arriving too quickly. Downstream, the consequences ripple outward. Rivers swell, levees experience pressure from both sides. Floodplains long developed for housing quietly resume their original role as overflow zone. In towns near Shasta Lake, relief quickly turns into vigilance. Roads once exposed during drought are now underwater. Rural communities scramble to place sandbags and reinforce low-lying areas. Emergency crews prepare for scenarios they haven't faced in years. Too much water has become the new emergency, but the most serious dangers are not always visible from the surface. As reservoirs fill rapidly, pressure builds not just against concrete walls, but within the ground itself. Water tables rise, sediments shift, old fault lines experience new loading stress. Geologists warn that sudden reservoir filling, especially after long drought periods, can subtly alter underground pressure conditions. This does not mean an earthquake is guaranteed, but it does mean the system is being stressed in unfamiliar ways. At the same time, aging infrastructure is being pushed harder than it has been in years. Spillways, tunnels, and underground drainage systems are operating near their limits. Maintenance crews work continuously, inspecting for leaks, erosion, or early signs of structural weakness. What once looked like a miracle refill now feels like a daily test. Because when systems fail under pressure, they rarely give advance warning. California's water infrastructure was designed for a different climate. A climate of averages, predictable winters, gradual snowmelt, time to react, that world no longer exists. Atmospheric rivers now deliver extreme rainfall in compressed bursts. Drought years harden the land, wet years overwhelm it. Infrastructure built for moderation is now being forced to operate at the extreme. And Shasta Lake is no longer just a symbol of recovery. It has become a stress test for the entire system. As water levels continue to climb, officials face difficult decisions. Release too much water too quickly and downstream communities could flood. Hold too much back and pressure on the dam increases. There are no perfect choices, only choices with consequences. For now, the lake continues to rise. The storms may pause, but the system remains on edge. Because the real question is no longer how full the reservoir will get. It's whether the infrastructure, the land, and the communities around it can handle what comes next. As Shasta Lake continues to climb, the most serious concerns are no longer visible from the shoreline. From above, the reservoir looks calm. The waterline creeps higher, boat ramps reappear, and satellite images suggest recovery. But beneath that smooth surface, pressure is building in ways that rarely make headlines and almost never enter public discussion until something goes wrong. When a reservoir fills rapidly after a prolonged drought, the ground beneath it responds unevenly. Years of dryness cause soil layers to shrink, crack, and compact. Clay-rich sediments lose elasticity. Microfractures form deep below the surface. When water returns suddenly, it does not simply sit on top of these layers. It pushes downward, infiltrating fractures, increasing pore pressure, and altering stress along buried fault line. This process is slow enough to be ignored in daily news cycles, but fast enough to concern geologists. California has experienced this phenomenon before. In the mid-20th century, rapid filling of large reservoirs was linked to unexpected seismic activity in regions previously considered stable. While those events were small, they served as warning. Water has weight, and when that weight shifts suddenly, the earth adjusts. At Shasta Lake, millions of tons of water are being added back into the system within weeks. That weight presses downward, forcing groundwater into spaces it has not occupied for years. Pressure redistributes along subsurface layers, and while this does not guarantee earthquakes, it introduces instability into systems that prefer equilibrium. Seismologists monitoring Northern California have quietly increased their attention to subtle ground movements near major reservoirs. These are not dramatic tremors that make headlines. They are micro-adjustments, tiny shifts, the kind that indicate stress redistribution rather than release. But stress, when unresolved, tends to accumulate. At the same time, engineers face a different challenge. Infrastructure that sat under low pressure for years is now being pushed back toward its limit. Concrete expands and contracts differently under rapid temperature and pressure changes. Spillway joints experience stress. Drainage tunnels must handle flow rates they haven't seen in over a decade. The system is doing exactly what it was built to do, but it is doing it under conditions it was never optimized for. What makes this moment particularly dangerous is the false sense of security that fullness creates. When reservoirs were low, the danger was obvious. Empty lake beds exposed cracked earth. Drought alerts dominated the conversation. Conservation was visible and urgent. Now the danger feels less intuitive. Water abundance is psychologically comforting. Full lakes suggest stability. But in reality, rapid abundance can be just as destabilizing as scarcity. When water arrives too quickly, systems lose the ability to buffer shock. Downstream from Shasta Lake, rivers are already carrying higher than normal flows. Levees built decades ago are absorbing pressure from sustained saturation. These structures were not designed for constant high water levels. They were designed for occasional peaks, followed by relief. Sustained pressure weakens them quietly. In agricultural regions, farmers who suffered through drought are now facing waterlogged fields. Crops planted during dry conditions struggle as soil oxygen levels drop. Drainage systems back up. Fields turn from productive land into temporary wetlands. This whiplash effect, drought to saturation, does long-term damage to soil health. Nutrient balances shift. Microbial systems collapse and reform unpredictably. Recovery takes years, not weeks. And yet storms continue to arrive. Atmospheric river systems have not disappeared. Forecast models suggest more moisture remains offshore, waiting for the right conditions to push inland. Each additional storm adds weight, pressure, and urgency to already strained systems. This places officials in an impossible position. Releasing water too early risks downstream flooding. Holding water too long increases pressure on infrastructure and subsurface system. Every decision is a trade-off between visible risk and invisible risk. And invisible risks are the hardest to communicate, because when something fails underground or within concrete, it rarely gives a countdown. California's water management system was designed during a time when extremes were rare. Engineers planned for worst-case scenarios, but those scenarios were based on historical patterns. Today's climate is rewriting those patterns in real time. The result is a system forced to adapt on the fly. At Shasta Lake, monitoring stations track water levels minute by minute. Engineers study stress reading. Seismologists watch for anomalies. Emergency planners quietly update response scenarios that few outside official circles ever see. The public hears optimism, recovery, refill. What they don't hear is how narrow the margin for error has become. Because once reservoirs approach capacity, every additional inch of water matters more than the last. Options shrink, reaction time compresses, and a system already operating at high pressure has less ability to absorb surprises. The concern is not that disaster is inevitable. The concern is that California is now operating closer to the edge than it has in decades, without the luxury of gradual change. Drought taught the state how to survive with less. This new reality demands learning how to survive sudden excess. And that lesson is far more dangerous because it arrives fast, tests systems immediately, and leaves little room for mistake. As Shasta Lake continues to rise, officials are not asking whether it will fill. They are asking whether everything beneath, downstream, and around it can withstand the strain. As Shasta Lake pushes closer to capacity, the conversation across California quietly shifts again. The fear is no longer about running out of water. It is about what happens when there is too much everywhere all at once. Full reservoirs change the rules. When lakes hover at moderate levels, operators have flexibility. They can absorb storms, delay releases, and smooth out fluctuations. But as levels climb toward the top of the operating range, that flexibility disappears. Every incoming storm becomes a problem that must be solved immediately, not later. This is where abundance turns into risk. At Shasta Lake, managers now track storms not in terms of seasonal totals, but hour by hour. Rainfall that once would have been welcomed is now measured against available storage space. A few inches upstream can translate into thousands of cubic feet per second downstream within hours. And once that water starts moving, it cannot be called back. This creates a chain reaction across the state's water network. Rivers that connect major reservoirs begin to synchronize. When multiple systems rise together, releasing water from one reservoir can worsen conditions downstream where another reservoir is already near capacity. Coordination becomes critical, and mistakes become costly. In Northern California, communities downstream of major dams live with an uncomfortable reality. Decisions made far upstream determine their safety. Controlled releases can flood low-lying roads, farmland, and neighborhoods even without a single drop of rain falling locally. For residents, this feels confusing and unfair. One day skis are clear. The next, evacuation warnings appear. Rivers swell not because of local storms, but because water is being pushed out of reservoirs to protect infrastructure upstream. Flooding without rain challenges public trust and complicates emergency communication. People prepare for storms, they do not prepare for management decisions. At the same time, floodplains that were developed during dry decades are being reclaimed by water. These areas were never truly safe, but drought made them appear harmless. Homes, warehouses, and roads were built where rivers historically spread during wet periods. Now those rivers are remembering their old paths. Levees, many of them aging and underfunded, face pressure from both sides. Water pushes from within, while saturated soils weaken their foundation. Small leaks, called boils, begin to appear. These are not dramatic failures. They are subtle warning. Muddy water bubbling up where it shouldn't. Each boil requires immediate attention. Sandbags, pumps, monitoring, because if left unchecked, a small leak can turn into a breach. California has seen this movie before. The lessons from past floods are well documented, but memory fades during long, dry periods. Systems designed for extremes slowly degrade when they are rarely tested. Then, when the test finally arrives, weaknesses emerge all at once. Meanwhile, emergency services are stretched thin. Crews that spent years responding to wildfire threats are now pivoting to flood response. Equipment must be repositioned, training must shift, planning assumptions must be rewritten. And this is happening while storms are still arriving. Another layer of complexity comes from sediment. During drought years, sediment settles and hardens in riverbeds and reservoirs. When water returns suddenly, it scours these deposits, sending heavy loads of silt downstream. This reduces channel capacity and increases flood risk even further. Water that once flowed smoothly now backs up behind sediment choke points. Bridges experience increased pressure. Intake systems clog. Treatment plants struggle to handle murkier water. This is not just a water quantity problem, it is a water quality problem. Communities relying on reservoir releases for drinking water face treatment challenges as sediment and debris increase. Filtration systems work harder, costs rise, and in extreme cases, water service can be disrupted even while reservoirs are full. This contradiction is hard to explain to the public. How can there be water everywhere, yet not enough safe water at the tap? The answer lies in speed. California's water system was built to move water deliberately, not violently. Gradual snowmelt was predictable. Operators could plan months ahead. Today's atmospheric river storms deliver that same volume in days or even hours. Speed overwhelms design, and speed removes margin. As Shasta Lake approaches its operational ceiling, every forecast matters. Every storm track becomes critical. Operators must decide whether to release water preemptively or wait and risk being forced into emergency releases later. Neither option is safe. Both carry consequences. Release too early and downstream flooding occurs without warning. Wait too long and structural stress increases, forcing rapid discharges when inflows peak. This is why full reservoirs do not bring peace of mind anymore. They bring tension. Behind closed doors, planners run scenarios that assume failure, not because they expect it, but because they must be ready for it. Emergency evacuation routes are reviewed. Communication plans are updated. Interagency coordination increases. And still, uncertainty dominates. Because climate volatility has turned what used to be rare events into regular occurrences, the extremes are no longer outliers. They are the new baseline. In this environment, the question is not whether California can store water. It is whether it can manage volatility, whether infrastructure built for moderation can survive a world of acceleration, and whether communities can adapt to emergencies that arrive without the traditional warning signs of storms, smoke, or drought. As reservoirs fill, California enters a phase where every decision carries immediate consequences. There is no room for delay, no room for error, and very little room for comfort, because the system is full. And when systems are full, even small shocks can cause big reactions. As the storms finally ease and reservoir levels begin to slow their climb, California does not relax. Instead, a different kind of unease settles in. This is the pause between events, the moment when systems appear stable, but everyone knows the next shift is already forming somewhere beyond the horizon. Shasta Lake's rapid rise has forced a hard realization. The state is no longer managing a water cycle. It is managing a volatility cycle. For decades, planning relied on averages: average snowfall, average runoff, average demand. Engineers designed dams, spillways, and canals around predictable seasonal rhythm. Snow accumulated in winter, melted slowly in spring, and reservoirs filled gradually. There was time to adjust. That time is disappearing. Today, water arrives in compressed bursts. Atmospheric rivers deliver weeks of precipitation in days. Droughts stretch longer and hit harder, drying soils to the point where they reject water instead of absorbing it. Then when rain finally falls, it runs off almost instantly. This on-off pattern breaks assumptions built into every layer of California's water system. Infrastructure that was meant to buffer extremes is now exposed to them repeatedly. Spillways operate more often. Emergency release protocols become routine. What were once rare events are now part of standard operation. This matters because emergency systems are not designed to be used constantly. At Lake Oroville, engineers still remember the spillway failure that forced mass evacuations years ago. Upgrades were made, monitoring improved, but the current pace of inflows tests even strengthened structures. Every heavy storm brings renewed scrutiny. Every release raises public anxiety. At Lake Berryessa, the famous Glory Hole spillway draws crowds when it overflows. It looks dramatic, even mesmerizing. But its increasing frequency sends a troubling signal. Emergency overflow structures were designed as last resorts, not seasonal features. When emergency mechanisms become normal, margins shrink. Operators are forced into impossible choices: release water and risk flooding downstream community, hold water and risk overwhelming the structure itself. There is no perfect answer. only decisions that minimize damage in one place while accepting it in another. This is the new reality of water management in California, and it extends far beyond dams. Urban drainage systems face similar stress. Stormwater infrastructure built for occasional heavy rain now confronts repeated deluges. Streets flood, storm drains back up. Wastewater systems overflow, contaminating waterways and beaches. Rural areas face different challenges. Agricultural fields become temporary lakes. Topsoil washes away. Crops planted during dry forecasts are lost to sudden saturation. Groundwater recharge, once seen as a benefit of wet years, becomes uneven and unpredictable. Even ecosystems struggle to adapt. Sudden floods disrupt habitats that evolved around gradual seasonal changes. Fish spawning cycles are thrown off. Riverbanks erode faster than vegetation can stabilize them. Wetlands swing between extremes, reducing their ability to buffer floods and filter water. The natural systems that once softened California's water swings are themselves being destabilized. At the policy level, the strain is just as visible. Water rights systems were built around scarcity. Who gets how much when water is limited? But abundance creates its own conflict. Who bears the risk when water must be released? Who pays for flood damage caused by protective actions upstream? These questions are harder to answer than drought allocation. Insurance markets are already reacting. Flood risk maps are being revised. Areas once considered low risk are reclassified. Premiums rise, coverage disappears. Communities that believed they were safe discover they are not. And trust becomes fragile. When people experience flooding during clear weather, confidence in institutions erodes. Communication becomes critical, yet difficult. Explaining complex hydrological decisions in real time is challenging even for experts, let alone residents facing rising water. This is where transparency matters more than reassurance. Because the truth is uncomfortable. California's water system is no longer operating within the boundaries it was designed for. It is being pushed repeatedly into territory where historical data offers limited guidance. Models based on the past struggle to predict the future. Satellite imagery shows shorelines reshaping in weeks. Reservoir basins that sat dry for years are now underwater. Entire landscapes are changing faster than planning documents can be updated. Scientists describe this shift in simple terms: the move from probability to possibility. Events that were once unlikely are now plausible. Plausible events are becoming frequent, and planning must now consider scenarios that would have been dismissed as unrealistic just a decade ago. This does not mean failure is inevitable, but it does mean adaptation must accelerate. New strategies are emerging: more flexible reservoir operation, expanded floodplain restoration to give rivers space to spread safely, investments in groundwater recharge that capture excess water when it arrives rather than letting it rush downstream. Technology plays a role too: better forecasting, real-time sensor networks, data-driven release decisions that respond faster than human judgment alone. Yet even the best tools cannot eliminate risk, they can only manage it. And management now means accepting that California lives between extremes. Every drop can be life-saving during drought, every surge can be destructive during floods. The same water that sustains the state can also threaten it. Shasta Lake's dramatic rise is a symbol of this dual reality. It represents renewal after scarcity, but it also exposes how fragile balance has become. The question going forward is not whether records will continue to fall. They will. The real question is whether systems, policies, and communities can evolve fast enough to live with constant change. Because the old rhythm is gone. In its place is a new one defined by uncertainty, speed, and extreme. And California's future will be shaped not by how much water it has, but by how well it navigates the narrow space between too little and too much. The answer is unfolding now, reservoir by reservoir, storm by storm, decision by decision. In the next surge,